Thank you for choosing to watch the SEL onboarding for Partnership for Success titled Implementing Equity-Based Social Emotional Learning. The outcomes we hope to have in today's training are to highlight equity-based social emotional learning and discuss strategies that can be implemented right away at your setting. Before we dive into strategies, we want to first talk about equity. We should always consider equity when working with our students, and especially with social emotional learning. Equity helps us frame our work. We want to help every student within our reach, and one tool to help us do that is to look at the tools and experiences we provide to youth. Is equity at the center of those experiences and tools? We're going to look at an image to help us think about this. When we look at this slide, we see 4 different images presented: equality, equity, opportunity, and agency. I want to start with equality. Equality is presumptuous. Equality only works if everyone is starting from the exact same place and has the exact same resources. Equality in this picture shows each child with the same resources and all on level ground. We know that we have systemic injustice that prevents youth from being on level ground. Therefore, equality does not work. To serve our students well, we need to ensure educational equity. Equity is acknowledging that different people have different circumstances and different lived experiences. Providing educational equity means that students have access to the right resources at the right time with no regard to race, ethnicity, language, disability, sexuality, gender, class, etc. Equity acknowledges that the system is unjust, represented by the unlevel ground in the photo. And equity gives each person the resources they need to reach the desired outcome. The goal is to get resources to youth and to reduce barriers, represented in the opportunity picture where the fence is removed. We want to ensure that opportunity is presented in a way that promotes playing in the game, which is when we move to agency. Again, we want to provide access to the right resources at the right time for every student. While social emotional learning can be taught in isolated standalone lessons, the great news is that you can incorporate SEL into what you already do. Leaders in social emotional learning would also say that social emotional learning is best taught when integrated into every day, not when we just teach it, say, at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays. It has value, yes, to teach lessons in isolation. It really begins to take on meaning when we apply it in everyday situations. These are the 8 competencies that we're going to cover today. These competencies support each other. If you work on one, you're likely supporting many others at the same time. We're going to start with self-awareness. Self-awareness we refer to as the building block and the gatekeeper of social emotional learning. Really, to work on all of the other competencies, you need to be self-aware to do that. Self-awareness, as the slide says, is the ability to accurately recognize your own emotions, your thoughts, your values, and how they influence you. How do they influence your behavior? Skills in self-awareness include things like identifying emotions, having an accurate self-perception, recognizing your strengths, building your self-confidence and your self-efficacy. We must first learn to manage ourselves so that we can build positive relationships, have empathy for others, set and work toward goals, make responsible decisions, grow in social awareness, and more. In the United States, there's research to demonstrate our cultural norms promote individualism and materialism. And this can lead to stress and health problems and even unethical behavior. When you add that to the tendency to associate wealth and whiteness as markers of success, it can certainly bend thinking toward negative biases toward people of color and people from lower income backgrounds. The good news is that we have the opportunity to disrupt this thinking. When we affirm students for who they are and reshape indicators of success, we are promoting a new thinking pattern, one where we know who we are, we believe in who we are, we know how to manage and regulate ourselves to work toward goals both now and in the future. Fostering a true sense of community decreases stress, decreases health concerns, and decreases unethical behavior. One strategy to use for self-awareness is a feelings wheel, similar to the one shown here. One aspect of self-awareness is to be able to identify emotion. Now, we start with 3 basic emotions: mad, sad, glad. A tool like this feelings wheel can help you develop a robust emotional vocabulary. This is a basic wheel with a few emotions listed. There are also wheels that go into significantly more detail. If you do a Google search for a feelings wheel, you'll see several examples. One thing of which to be aware when you're talking about feelings with students is that different cultures may view and manage emotions according to their cultural norms. You can take an equitable approach to emotions by asking youth how they perceive different emotions. You can also do some work on your own by learning about the cultures from which your students come. Cultural scripts guide how emotion is perceived and displayed, and perhaps even regulated. In some cultures, you may see men displaying emotion differently than women. It's important to understand the cultural backgrounds. This feelings wheel is a great tool to ask students how they're feeling. It's great to have these feeling wheels in classrooms, offices, places in your space where youth will be. It helps them identify their feelings and will help you have a meaningful conversation together about their emotions. It's critical to be able to identify emotions before we can manage them. Now we're going to look at identifying strengths. When you identify strengths and successes of individuals, students, and groups, self-awareness tends to grow. Self-awareness recognizes your own strengths and successes. Affirming individual strengths promotes equity, as doing this values individual students. How do we do this? We just talk about strengths and successes with our students. Ask students to write down or draw their strengths. What do they think they're good at? You, as the leader, need to be prepared to help students who may struggle in identifying their strengths. As students are comfortable, they can share their strengths with the group. Note, this is also self-reflection, it's literacy, it's public speaking. Social emotional learning is so great because it often leads to other standards as well. So after students share, one example on the slide is the picture on the left where you see the student said that their strengths were skiing, concentration, focusing, to keep trying, and things of that nature. You can then facilitate and take this activity a step further and highlight common strengths and successes in your group. That's shown in photo number 2, where we found commonalities between strengths that were shared. This helps to build relationships in the presence of difference. It looks at what community members have in common, as well as how they complement one another. As you learn students' strengths, leverage them. You may give them a job in the classroom, or maybe they, have the opportunity to lead a lesson to share their hobby. We're going to switch to self-management. Self-management is the ability to successfully regulate yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors in different situations. It's talking about impulse control. It's talking about self-motivation. It's talking about setting and working toward goals. Too often in American schools, we prioritize middle-class culture. When students aren't from this culture, they could potentially experience stress due to the pressure to assimilate. When your heritage doesn't line up with your host, it can lead to stress, mental health challenges, and dysregulated behavior. Discrimination can also contribute to mental health challenges, stress, and dysregulated behavior. Students can experience discrimination in many areas, including race, class, gender, sexuality, among other areas. So what can we do? We can promote equity. We can work to disrupt oppressive systems and affirm students. We can create culture where we value race, class, gender, and heritage. We can teach self-management tools to cope with the very real stress of discrimination and acculturation. We can help students recognize what happens in their bodies when they are stressed. Do their muscles tense? Do they ball up their fists? Do they pace? Do they shut down? Help students know themselves so that they can manage themselves. Let's look at some strategies to do that. The peace corner, or some people call it a calm down corner, it's a space that you designate in your center where youth can go to self-regulate. I want to be very clear, this is not a timeout. This is not a behavior management technique. This is a tool to equip students to manage and regulate themselves. Students go to this space to self-regulate. So you're going to want to explain the space to students, demonstrate how it works, normalize self-regulation and the need to self-regulate. So you're going to go to the space and show students what's available for them. You can have different things there for them to choose from to help them self-regulate. It may be a space where they don't do anything. They just need a moment to themselves. You might have a journal or paper to draw. You might have glitter jars or sensory items such as Play-Doh. You want to encourage students to go there when they're feeling dysregulated. Remind them that they are not in trouble. This is a place to go to choose one of those tools that will help them regulate so that they can rejoin the activity. It's also important after students have spent time there to regulate to take a moment as soon as you can to just debrief with them and reflect for a second on, what happened and how did they regulate themselves. Affirm that they, recognize dysregulation and that they worked to regulate themselves. Another technique to help students self-manage are breathing techniques. And breathing techniques are for when students are dysregulated. They're very, very powerful. They help us to reset and to think more clearly. We have a couple of examples on this slide. There are many, many techniques that you can use. These are just a few. Square breathing is very popular. The blue circle helps you see where to start. You can then trace the shape with your finger or follow it with your eyes. You breathe in as you count to 4. You hold and count to 4. You breathe out as you count to 4. And you hold for 4. And you repeat this until you feel your body regulating. Talk about what it feels like to be regulated. Maybe it's that your muscles relax. Maybe it's that your fists loosen, that you stop pacing, but help students understand what it means to be regulated and how that, what that means for them specifically. The figure 8 or the lazy 8 breathing is another technique. Again, start in the middle at the blue circle and trace the shape with your finger or your eyes. Younger students may need something more visual like belly breathing, where you place your hands on your belly. And as you breathe in, you feel your abdomen enlarge. And as you breathe out, you feel like it's smaller. You may find that some students don't need a visual aid. They simply just need the reminder to take slow, deliberate breaths. Coach them on this as they continue to learn. Let them know that breathing calms our brain down. It helps us to think more clearly and to make better decisions. It also gives us something to focus on when we're focused on our breath rather than perhaps on the emotion or whatever is happening around us that is causing us to become dysregulated. Another strategy you can use is to have a feelings journal. A feelings journal can be used by students just to reflect on how they're feeling. This can be in a moment when they're not feeling great. It can be when they're feeling wonderful. It's just helpful to help them think about their feelings and to write about them in this journal. It encourages students to monitor their feelings. They can write about what's making them feel frustrated, infuriated, sad, joyful, excited, whatever feeling word they're describing. Habitual reflection helps us to learn ourselves and manage ourselves. Younger students might draw if they're not able to write quite yet. Intermediate students might draw and write. Older students might write and perhaps illustrate. It's up to them. The point is that they're monitoring their feelings and reflecting on them. Another strategy for self-management includes sensory items. Sensory items are a wonderful addition to a student space. It could be at a peace corner, it could be in your supplies, great to have in your spaces. Sensory items are something to hold, like Play-Doh or a stress ball, for example. They help us to focus. And personally, I typically have something in my hands to help me focus during meetings. It helps me focus. So I understand this one very, very much. Sensory items can help us regulate when we're dysregulated, or when we feel ourselves starting to become dysregulated, they can bring us back pretty quickly. How do we do this? We have these tools ready for students. We teach them how to use them. Sensory jars can be really helpful. Glitter jars, for example, are a great tool. We shake them up, and as we watch the glitter settles, our emotions also start to settle, and it helps us regulate as we still our bodies to watch the glitter. There are other jars with thick, viscous liquid like perhaps corn syrup and marbles inside. You watch the marbles sink to the bottom, you flip it over, and you watch again. And as the slow-moving marbles move, you can regulate your breathing and yourself as well. Just remember, with sensory items, they're not one size fits all. We want to be equitable, right? We want to provide the right resource for the right time to students. Find what works for each student by offering options and coaching. You can coach them on how to use the items as well as how to monitor the regulation. When we look at social awareness is the ability to take perspective of other people and to empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The ability to understand social and ethical norms for behavior and recognize family, school, and community resources and supports are all big contributors to social awareness. We want to be aware that students from diverse backgrounds, whether that's socioeconomic, racial and ethnic backgrounds, et cetera, may experience stress as a result of dominant culture in their schools. As the United States grows in diversity, too often we highlight differences in a negative way rather than highlight what connects us and what we have in common. This can lead to stress, it can lead to disengagement, alienation, all of which impact success and well-being. It's critical that we help students build empathy. Empathy is a key component of social awareness. Furthermore, we want to help students and adults for that matter understand diversity, respect diversity, and appreciate diversity. We can do this through discussion and activities that promote a collaboration in the presence of difference. One of these is cultural sharing. Cultural sharing celebrates cultures. It highlights our differences and it highlights what connects us. This helps us to build and strengthen relationships and to foster empathy. Cultural sharing is when you facilitate a discussion about culture represented by students in your group. You can talk about any aspect of culture, language, food, religion, art, customs, etc. Invite students to share their culture as much or as little as they're comfortable sharing. You can even extend this and have students bring in items from their culture. You could even extend this to parent engagement by having a cultural celebration where families learn from one another and celebrate culture, perhaps with a fashion show, a musical demonstration, and something like that to celebrate culture. Classroom agreements are another great way to foster social awareness. Classroom agreements get buy-in from students regarding the type of culture you want to build and foster in your space. Having students work together to write a classroom agreement allows them to speak into the process and allows them to have voice and help shape the environment of which they're a part. To do this, facilitate a discussion, determine what you value as a community. Talk about accountability and how you can all work together to sustain this culture. Then if someone breaks the agreement, you have it to direct them to and to help them reconcile with the community. On a side note, I've done this activity actually with our adult team as well. We talk about what kind of culture we want to have and what we will commit to do to sustain that culture. We sign it, we post it in a common staff space. And if someone is struggling with something we've agreed to, we simply go back to the agreement and remind ourselves of the discussion that we had and the kind of culture that we want to maintain. Social awareness calls us to be aware of our space and how we are building this with our students. So many of us are in this field to advocate for youth. And one way that we do that is to not turn a blind eye. We want to be a system disruptor. When you see someone being excluded, address it. Promote inclusion. You be the one to shut down discrimination when it happens. When you see students or colleagues experiencing stress from social pressures, discrimination, inequities, and bullies, you be the one to do something. We can create and foster safe environments. Next, we want to look at relationship skills, the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. We also want to look at communicating clearly, listening well, cooperation, negotiating conflict, social engagement, teamwork, etc. And as we're learning to be self-aware, self-manage, and growing in social awareness, this helps us work on our relationship skills. We understand things differently. We have various lived experiences. These different understandings of norms regarding emotional management, age, gender, class, and so on can lead to friction as we can misunderstand each other's efforts to share together. We want to work toward growth and healthy conflict resolution, not simply work to get groups to follow expectations and be compliant. We get there by shared understanding and growing together. Relationships are an equity issue. Students need to learn to develop and cultivate healthy relationships. This is a tool that, like most SEL tools, will set them up for life. Let's look at how to use some strategies to build relationships. Group projects are great doors for discussion around collaboration, regardless of the topic. Working toward a common goal together provides opportunities for students to work together, to collaborate in the presence of difference, to practice negotiation and conflict resolution, and to work on teamwork skills. Working together helps students strengthen these skills. It's all in how you set up expectations. Let students know the deal breakers. We respect each other's opinions, for example. We listen to each group member. We give value to group members' input. Let them know the expectation. Now, if you need to intervene and mediate, do that. When you finish group work, you can always elevate it to an SEL activity by debriefing and reflecting. Ask questions such as, how did it feel to give value to everyone? What ideas were contributed to your group that might not have been if we didn't give everyone a turn to share? Tie it back into equity, affirming individuals and giving value to each other in the presence of difference. Another great skill to work on with relationship skills is perspective taking. Teaching perspective taking is a great tool to help students build both social awareness and relationship skills. We all need to understand there are multiple perspectives. To think that our perspective and our truth is everyone's perspective can actually be harmful. How do we work on perspective taking? You can start with a simple exercise like the one on this slide. You can ask students what they see. The image on the left, do they see a vase? Or do they see the side profiles of two faces looking at one another? On the right, do they see a face? Or do they see the side profile of someone playing the saxophone? This application comes into effect when you have students who see things differently. You can remind them about perspective taking and ask them to think about one another's perspectives. As we move to responsible decision making, we'll make note that it is the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety concerns, and social norms. We want to look at things like identifying problems, analyzing a situation, problem solving, evaluating, reflecting, and ethical responsibility. We constantly make decisions. Some are small, for example, maybe what song to listen to. Some decisions we know to be very significant. Do we run the yellow light or do we stop? How should we respond to a stressful situation? Decisions can have significant impact on us and others. We want to promote decision-making in a way that sets up students and adults to create and contribute towards systems that disrupt inequities and that promote inclusive, mutually supportive systems. When we think about decision-making, it's important to note that adults use the prefrontal cortex, that's the rational part of our brains, to make decisions. Youth, up until actually in their early 20s, use the amygdala. That's the emotion center of the brain. So by practicing and discussing responsible decision-making, we are positioning students to begin strengthening the connection between that prefrontal cortex and their amygdala. There are ways to do this, some through community building and some through decision-making together. One way to work together toward making decisions is to have regular class meetings. They're great opportunities for community building. They provide intentional time for students to share, to be heard, and to listen to one another. There are a few opportunities for decision-making in class meetings that provide great practice for youth. It's ideal if you can allow time for a class meeting every day. This can be just a few minutes or maybe up to 20 minutes or so. It's about the quality of the meeting, not the quantity of time. Set expectations for the class meeting. Let students know that we expect to be responsible listeners. We will show respect for what others share. We'll try to take the other's perspective as they share. The parts of a class meeting are listed on this slide. The greeting, it's so important to know names. Make space for this, for you to know the youth names and for them to know the names of one another. Also, purpose to know how to pronounce names correctly. This may take time, but I guarantee you it's worth the investment. It is very important to understand someone's name and how to say it correctly. After we greet one another, we move to engaged sharing. Engaged sharing can be just a check-in on how people are feeling, or maybe even answering a question of the day. Students have to make a decision here about what they're willing to share, what they're not willing to share, as well as how they will respond to what others share. Then you could have an SEL promoting activity. It can be tied to academics, movement, enrichment. One example for math would be to give students fraction cards if they are of the age where they are working on fractions. They have to get up and find a student with an equivalent fraction. This promotes math, obviously. It also supports movement. It's very important to have movement in our spaces. It also fosters discussion and a sense of shared purpose. Other ideas include maybe having a conversation starter. An example could be share a time when you felt hopeful, and then have a conversation around that and invite students to share. The message for the day just kind of previews your day together. What are we doing today is covered in the message. Class meetings are also great to use for problem solving. If there's a community problem, the community comes around it by way of a class meeting to discuss it and work toward resolution. Would you rather questions? I'm a big fan of these. It's important for youth to understand that their decisions have impact. It's helpful for them to think about how their decisions will impact them personally, as well as how it will impact others. You can use would you rather questions as conversation starters. They also make great time fillers when you have a few minutes between activities. Would you rather questions can also provide a little brain break before you transition to another activity. They can be simple questions such as, would you rather eat breakfast in the morning or have breakfast for dinner? Would you rather have super strength or super speed? Then you can take them deeper. Once students see that their decisions have impact, these can actually lend themselves to great discussion. One example that you can ask, that I often ask our students, is if you had the power, would you rather end hatred or poverty? The reflection comes in the why. Why would you rather do the thing that you chose? Understand that it has impact. Would you rather questions actually facilitate great discussions. You can emphasize the importance of the decision, the importance of building empathy, and thinking through the impact of the decision. We're now going to look at goal-directed behavior, and that's the ability to initiate and persist in completing tasks of varying difficulty in order to reach a goal. Setting goals helps us to think beyond today. As we think about an equity-centered approach, it's important to remember that some people are fighting for today. So setting goals in the future may be a new concept or one that they wrestle with a bit. Goals don't have to be months or years away. Goals can be daily. If I'm learning to self-manage, my goal today might be to let my teacher know when I feel like I'm becoming dysregulated. My goal may be to listen when it's someone else's turn to talk. All goals have importance. Equity is encouraging each student where they are and setting goals that are relevant to them. Allow student voice in setting goals. They should be the driving force behind their goals. Even if you have a specific goal in mind for a student, you can ask questions to aid the process, but let students speak. Ask students what is important to them. Also, be mindful not to limit the goals to academics. Goals can revolve around any area in which we want to grow: sports, nutrition, art, language, contributing to a household or community, setting goals around screen time or for the future. Goal setting can be very impactful. One way to work on goal setting is to look at a SMART goal. Probably a familiar concept to a lot of people. SMART goals provide a framework to help you think through goal setting. How do we do that? We look at the acronym. The S stands for specific. We want to avoid generalities when we set goals. We want to help students take, I want to be a good student, which is sort of a general goal. We want to be specific. So that goal might say, I want to finish my work on time. The M is for measurable. How will you know you've reached the goal? Can you measure it? So for the goal I mentioned that I want to finish my work on time, I can measure that. I either finished my work on time or I didn't. The A stands for achievable. Are there small steps to take to work toward the goal? We think about running a marathon, but if we're not a runner, we might want to start with a small step like running a mile or running a 5K. The R stands for realistic. Does this goal make sense? Is it something that can be accomplished within the time frame that I'm setting? T is for timely. Time targets help us to focus. For ongoing goals, we may keep resetting the time. In this example, the student may set daily or weekly goals to continue finishing work on time until it becomes a habit. Then the student might work toward a new goal. Another way to work on goal setting on goal-directed behavior rather, is to share goal-setting stories from relevant people. It can be really helpful to find stories of people who have set and achieved goals, and that can inspire us. Sharing relevant stories can also see how goals have helped other people. So we want to talk about goals. Share stories about people with whom students might be familiar, such as the ones on the slide. Then ask students about people in their circles who have set and worked toward goals. This could turn into a time of sharing, of writing. There are a lot of activities that you could do with this. Sharing relevant stories can be very impactful. Personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is the ability to be careful and reliable in your actions, to understand expectations, to be dependable, conscientious, to be a role model for your peers. I want you to remember that equity means leveling the playing field. It means we give each student the tools they need for where they are. If we want to teach students to be personally responsible, we need to define expectations. Students are not mind readers. I've seen many leaders discipline students for not meeting expectations that were never clearly set. So we want to work on expectations and equip our students to meet them. So let's look at a few strategies to help teach personal responsibility. We can teach personal responsibility in a way that acknowledges and builds upon students' strengths. Working with student strengths is a relevant way to talk about responsibility. We want to discern what students are good at, observe them, ask them, and then leverage their strengths. Find out what they enjoy. When are they happiest? So if you have a student who loves to write, you may have just found your next class historian who documents classroom moments. You have a student who loves taking pictures, there's your photographer. The student who rearranges furniture and has a lot of energy, wonderful. Let her help with activity preparation. Build upon students' strengths. Help them see their strengths even when they don't. Another way we can help students grow in responsibility is to make sure we're providing tools for them to be successful. Equity, again, is providing the right resources at the right time to help students grow toward goals. It's important to look at what students need, because putting the right tool in their hands may make a significant difference in how they grow in responsibility and management of themselves. What do students need to stay on task? It's not about everyone having the same thing. It's about each student having what they need. Some students may need a peer to help them. Other students may need a timer. Some students benefit from flexible seating, others do not. Some students like checklists, others are irritated by them. Help them find what they need so that they can be responsible. It's all about communication. I have a student who needs movement breaks in order to stay on task. We did virtual school this year and it was hard. And about every 20 to 25 minutes, he needed a 5 to 10 minute break. But doing that actually helped him to stay on task. Now, he's the only one in the class who had that specific schedule. The other students were aware that it helped him demonstrate responsibility. They supported it, which helped them demonstrate responsibility toward their peer. We have another student who's consistently concerned about time. So we gave him an individual timer that is a visual timer that we set for him so that he can monitor time. That helps him monitor responsibility. It's a tool that he needed. Providing students with tools and teaching them how to use those tools helps us teach personal responsibility in an equitable way. Finally, we're going to cover optimistic thinking. Optimistic thinking is the ability to have an attitude of confidence, hopefulness, and positive thinking regarding situations in the past, present, and future. It's speaking positively about yourself. It's speaking positively about those around you. It's looking forward to the future, and it's believing in the ability to achieve plans and goals. Teaching optimism is really important. Pessimism is linked to higher risk for depression, along with anxiety, sleep disorders, and heart disease, just to name a few. If we want to disrupt systems that place our students at risk, one way is to teach optimism. It's also important to note that optimism can be taught. Realistic optimism, we want to look at the fact that learned helplessness is the thought that we don't have control over what happens to us. That often leads to passivity and perhaps the loss of motivation. Optimism is a tool to fight learned helplessness and to reframe our thinking. We can help students do this in a positive way. For example, perhaps they lost the basketball game, but skill practice is important and will help prepare them for future games. Teaching optimism takes practice. It's reframing situations, and it takes practice after practice after practice, but eventually we can help students reframe their thinking in an optimistic way. Another way to think about optimistic thinking is to think about practicing gratitude. We can do this through journals, we can do this through conversations. It's important to practice gratitude. Even on the worst days, we're in control of our attitude. We can cultivate gratitude. You've probably heard that pausing each day to name 3 things for which you are thankful actually helps to form new neural pathways in our brains. It helps to reframe the way we look at things. How could we do this? A number of different ways, like we mentioned, through journals and conversations. It may also be helpful to have a daily practice for youth in your space to name 3 things for which they are thankful. You may consider having a gratitude wall in your classroom. We recently had a gratitude tree in our center, such as these types of trees. It could be literal branches or a tree that you've made from paper, but some sort of continual display that students can continue to add to and continue to think about gratitude. A really important way to teach optimistic thinking is to model it. We want to speak positively, take a negative event and frame it positively whenever we can, and maybe call it out that you're doing that. Acknowledge that something is not ideal, but then also show how you're reframing your thinking. When we found ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, it would have been really easy to feel helpless. There was so much that was out of our control. I had to resolve to speak positively. We had a rule on our team at work. We were not allowed to operate in the mindset that we can't do certain things anymore. Instead, we had to find a way just to do it differently. So an example is we couldn't have our normal all program morning rally during our summer program because we had social distance regulations and group capacity requirements. Instead of not doing it, all of our classrooms jumped on a Zoom call and we rallied that way. So we weren't allowed to say that we can't have a morning rally. We had to find a way to do it differently. This was an optimistic model. You can serve as a role model both to peers and definitely to youth in your sphere of influence. Model optimism. Build neural pathways that support this type of thinking. This comes from practice. Here's just a little inspirational reminder that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Prioritize educational equity in all that you do. It's our job as adults to give our students the tools they need where they are. The way that we lead has impact. Let's do all we can to impact change and equip students with tools that will help them for the rest of their lives. Social emotional learning is one way that we can have significant impact and equip our students for life. We just want to cite some references that we used in this training and also to let you know that you can view our website at partnershipforsuccess.org for more information. Lots of free resources there and different trainings as well. Thanks everybody for attending. Take care.